Hey, I'm Ellen Mary.
And I'm Michael Perry.
And he's a plant geek.
And she's a plant addict.
And this is the Plant-Based Podcast.
This is more than just a gardening podcast. We'll be exploring the world of plants from every possible angle. We'll be talking about plant-based diets, plant materials and fabrics, the well-being qualities of plants, and giving plenty of gardening tips and tricks.
So we'll be chatting worldwide to companies and individuals that are being creative with plants in new and exciting ways. From fabulous flower crowns to foliage-filled lounges.
Botanical moisturisers to bamboo clothing.
It's all here.
And it's all made of plants.
Suttons, suppliers of gardening products since 1806, sponsor the Plant-Based Podcast. Visit them online at suttons.co.uk.
Hello, in this episode we're going to look at bees and how important they are in our gardens and what we can do to encourage more bees into our outdoor spaces. We're here with Beverley Glover, who is the director of the Cambridge University Botanic Garden, and she's also a professor of plant systematics and evolution. And we're going to ask her more about bees, but first off, could you give me a bit of a potted history of Cambridge University Botanic Garden?
I can. So we've been here on this site since 1846. It's a 40-acre site. We've got about 8,000 species from all around the world here. And the garden was founded on this site specifically to study plants in their own right. So previous botanic gardens in other countries and other places in Britain, very small gardens designed to show medical students about plants as medicine. But we had a professor of botany here in the university, John Henslow, who had the great idea that actually plants were really cool themselves. They were much more interesting than just medicine.
Definitely, we agree.
We do agree. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
And he persuaded the university he needed a big site. He wanted to grow trees, he wanted to grow plants in their family groups, he wanted to really look at diversity, and so he needed the site to do that. And we've been here since then, growing those plants, letting anybody who needs them for research purposes have access to them, using them for teaching. Many universities around the world borrow our collection for teaching, and also, of course, showing it all off to the local children, visitors, school groups who come from around the country to see what we've got to offer.
I see lots of kids around today actually having study lessons. There were some children in the glass house earlier drawing cacti.
Yeah,
We're
I wish
very
I did that
excited.
at my age.
Yeah. So I wondered, if you could take us back a little bit to how you got involved in botany in the first place, kind of what sparked your interest in the first place and how did it all happen?
Okay, so that's taking me back to being an undergraduate, and I went off to university to do biology thinking I was interested in animals and particularly dolphins and whales and marine biology. And then I discovered that actually plants were much cooler because if you think about it, everything an animal has to do, get enough to eat, keep dry enough, get enough to drink, not get eaten, find a mate, disperse its offspring, a plant has to do as well. But the animals have it so easy, they just get up and walk away. It's not enough food, they go find some, they run away from a tiger. But plants have got to solve all those same problems rooted to the spot. And when I realised that, I thought, actually, this is much, much, much more interesting. There are some really clever solutions. The trick is to try and understand how every plant's solving those problems.
That's really interesting. And actually, we spoke to somebody else who's currently doing a master's in crop improvement and something. But she said the same thing. She actually went to university to study biology and then realised that plants were really cool and exciting and totally different and more interesting than other aspects of biology. So that's really interesting, a way to get into what you do. So now you're here as director. What does your role kind of involve? What are you doing on a day-to-day basis?
Well, it's the best job in the world. And it's good preparation for running the UN later, I think. So Botanic Garden has this amazing diversity of roles. We're supporting research because we're a university botanic garden. That's our main function. A big education programme. 300,000 visitors a year who just come for a great day out and because it's beautiful and there's all sorts of things to see. We want them to learn while they're here. And balancing all of those different priorities and aspects of the garden is really my role. So I have to make sure that all of the things that are our main objectives are properly in the public eye, that the university sees what we're doing. I have to mediate a lot of disputes. I'm sure I have gardeners who would like to ban all those school children because they trample on the plants. And I have education staff who'd like to let them dig them all up because they'd be learning how to garden. So it's balancing all those different aspects of our job and making sure that we continue to do all of the things we want to do as well as we can.
Yeah, it sounds really exciting.
Oh, definitely. And of course, a large part of your role is bees.
Yeah.
And researching, finding out more about bees, kind of trying to find ways that we can encourage more bees into our gardens. So tell us more about that part of your role.
So that's part of the research part of my role. So as a professor in the university, I have a research programme, and what we're interested in is understanding how flowers attract different types of animal pollinators. So not just bees, actually, but butterflies, hummingbirds, and so on. And we focus on the flowers. I'm a botanist, so we look at the flowers and work out what features they have, colours, patterns, shapes that might attract different animal pollinators. We try and understand how the flower builds them. And we try and understand how the bee, particularly, we use bees because they're easier to work with than a lot of those other animals, how they interact with the features of the flower. And so how the whole thing fits together to evolve into a great pollination system. And then some of that information then goes on also to inform design of seed mixes for bees, or to help crop breeders work out how to make their crops most attractive to bees as well.
Why is that important now? What's happening in the world now?
Well, lots of things are happening that make it important. I mean, everything we do as plant biologists at the moment is set in the context of the growth of the human population. So there are going to be a lot more people to feed. They're going to rely on plants for that food. And so understanding how plants work is really, really important. But if you're interested in flowers and pollination, of course, we're also looking at a time when there's a lot of concern about bee populations. And we don't have great scientific data on what's happening to lots of different bee populations, but we do have some data, and we know from those places where people have done good long-scale studies that the number of species of bees you find in an area tends to be going down, the number of individuals of each species tends to be going down, and then there are big concerns like the problems that we've seen with managed honeybee populations in different countries as well. So, pollination is important for making food, it's important for conserving biodiversity, and we look like we're having problems with our pollinators.
That's scary, isn't it?
Definitely. So what are the main things that happen when we don't have enough bees then? What are the real risks to humankind?
So it comes in all sorts of different ways, and there are different ways of quantifying it, but I mean, a big concern would be around food. So loads of food crops, about a third of what we grow as food by weight is animal pollinated, so relies on bees particularly to carry pollen from flower to flower. So that's all your oilseed crops, like oilseed rape, fruit crops, apples, strawberries, nuts, but also things that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Legumes, really important in protein supply, particularly in developing countries. They really rely on insects for pollination. So we worry about food supply. But there's also what's going on out there in terms of natural biodiversity. If you don't have the insects pollinating the flowers, you lose biodiversity in meadow settings. When you lose plant biodiversity, then you lose biodiversity of the insects that feed on those plants, the herbivorous insects. And so the whole system starts to get less and less
a whole
diverse.
knock-on effect over time.
Yeah.
But
setting the scene here, there's a lovely picture here on one of the shelves
I had some bee.
of a very beautiful bee covered in pollen on a plant, and there's many different types of bees, aren't there? We generally see the bumblebee and the honeybee, but there are lots, aren't there? How many are there?
There are about 20,000 species of bees.
Okay, I wasn't expecting that.
And are they all as endangered?
No,
Yeah.
we don't know for most of them. We honestly
Okay.
don't know for most of them. There are about 200, 250 species in this country. Just the one honeybee, about 20 bumblebees, 25 bumblebees. And then the rest are much smaller bees that you may not notice that still form a major pollination service. And of course, the studies out there are on the honeybees because they're commercially important, a bit on the bumblebees, which is what we mostly work with, and the other ones we really don't know very much about.
Oh, that's really interesting.
The bumblebees are kind of the ones that people would traditionally have seen in their gardens, aren't they? And the ones that would have stung us as a child as well, aren't they?
Yeah, so those nice big fluffy bumblebees. And honeybees are a little bit smaller. They look more like wasps.
I had quite a few red-tailed bumbles in my garden this year. I love those. They look so fluffy. It's like I want to stroke them, but obviously, really.
They're pretty calm actually. They don't sting unless they're really feeling under attack. So you can put your hand out and they'll often walk onto it.
I do love bees. I know this. Everyone says I love bees. I love gardening. I love bees. But I genuinely feel very happy when I see bees in my garden. We've recently just moved into the city from a rural garden where it was full of bees and insects, and the difference is it's vast where I am now. I have a balcony full of flowers and lots of pollinators, and the bees are really high up. I know that's silly, but I wasn't expecting them to be so high up, but they are. They find the flowers,
they really do.
which is really interesting. So we're going to talk to you a little bit further about your research in a little while, which I'm really looking forward to hear about, because, you know, how bees are attracted to different plants and how that process works.
Yes, great.
Yeah, and how people at home can obviously help attract more bees to the garden.
Good.
It's so good to meet Beverley and find out how she got into researching bees and being the director at the garden, isn't it?
I know, and it all came from her childhood, kind of believing that plants were cooler than animals.
Yeah.
Which
So-
we know is right.
We know, don't we?
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting, you know, at that age she actually went to university to study biology, expecting that she would study animals. But, you know, for something sparked
Definitely.
her
And-
interest in plants, and
but
I
then,
love that.
Oddly, she's then ended up studying living creatures in bees.
Yeah.
And we're going to look more in part 2 about bees and how great they are in our gardens, how it's so important, and also find out that some of the favourite flowers of
That's right.
some of my favourite flowers are not really the best for bees, which is kind of, I'm a little bit upset about
Well, I'm
this.
sure a lot of gardeners would probably be thinking the same thing. Be thinking the same thing.
Cheese.
I know. But it's true, isn't it? We plant up a garden based upon what plants we like or what are suitable for our soil. We don't necessarily think about the bees.
But do you, Ellen, in your garden, do you accommodate bees? Do you give them a bee buffet?
Do I give them a bee? My garden is a bee buffet.
Yeah?
I do think about bees. I do love bees. I love seeing nature and wildlife in the garden, and because recently we've moved into the city, the difference between how much we see is vast from our old rural garden, and so for that reason I do tend to think about what I'm planting in the city. And I have seen bees this year, but very, very much fewer, basically, than when we were in our countryside garden.
But is it harder for you because you're gardening in containers?
Well, yes, it is. It is harder because you've got to get the plants that are suitable for the containers.
Which are often a bit bigger and a little bit more kind of less tidy.
More foliage, perhaps, as well. You know, you get the kind of big foliage plants. So it's interesting. So I'm very interested to hear what Beverley's got to say and the tips she's got for us.
Yeah, and she's got some lovely kind of experiments that we almost get involved in with, you know, checking out the surface of flowers, how that can affect bees, and also the kind of colour and how it shines too.
So, Beverley, we've got some odd-looking parts in front of us on the table, yellows and blues. Do you want to talk us through your research and what this means, and we'll describe it to listeners?
It's a science class for us,
yes,
isn't it?
it is.
Great. So we're interested in understanding how different features of flowers attract animal pollinators. So we want to know how different colours or textures or shapes or symmetries or sizes work. So we can work out how evolution has shaped all these different types of flowers we love in our gardens, and also so we can help inform people about the best ones to grow to attract pollinators. But when we do that, we want to be able to compare things in a very controlled way. So I want to not just compare two completely different flowers, but say I'm interested in the colour, I want two flowers that are identical apart from the colour. And so we make these artificial flowers that you've got in front of you. These are made out of a resin, and they vary in just one trait. So these yellow ones you can see, you can't see a difference, but if you feel them, you might be able to tell that there's a bit of a difference.
So we've got two yellow circles, basically, and
Like lollipops.
just like lollipops, and
I see, yeah.
one is very smooth to touch and the other is very rough to touch.
So these are mimicking the surfaces of different flowers. The smooth one is a glossy surface, like a buttercup, and the rough one is something a bit more velvety, looking like a petunia or a snapdragon. And using these in a cage setup with bumblebees, we use the buff-tailed bumblebee, we were able to show that the bees prefer the rough texture, and we were able to show the reason, which is that they can get a grip onto it with the claws on their feet, and makes it much easier and quicker for them to actually access the food.
It makes sense, doesn't it, really? When you think about an insect, you know, on a plant, that makes perfect sense, but you don't think about it day to day in the garden. So.
No.
So is this something that wasn't understood as well previously?
Yeah. So we knew that a lot of flowers, most flowers, have a rough surface texture. Those examples I gave you are the ones where you can really see the velvety effect. But probably about 3/4 of flowers do have a rough surface texture, and we didn't know why.
Okay.
Oh, that's really interesting.
But I've got a question. So if there's a buttercup which has this smooth texture that the bee can't grip onto, does it mean then it's useless for the bee? There's no option, or is there another way the bee can be accommodated by this flower?
So I think all flowers are compromises. And for the buttercup, that glossy texture is actually about focusing light. So that's another project we've worked on, is understanding how the buttercup works, how you get that yellow reflection under your chin.
Doesn't that mean something? There's folklore about that.
Supposed
Whether you
to
like
mean-
butter or
That's
not.
right.
Yeah, everyone loves butter.
Well, they should do, because the buttercup works for everyone. It's got a little mirror on the surface that reflects the yellow light back up at your chin. And that's really about a visual attractant to the bee. It's just this really bright, shiny yellow beacon. And evolution has obviously decided that that's more important than grip in that case. The flower looks shiny. But often the smooth textured flowers we see aren't actually pollinated by bees. So if you think about something like a moth, it doesn't actually land on the flower. It hovers when it's feeding.
Okay.
And so those flowers don't need a grippy texture.
The natural world is so clever.
It's just, it is clever. It's so fascinating. Over all of the years,
Yeah.
that's how it's evolved, so that everything works together in the way that it does.
Definitely.
So we've got blue ones as well here, blue circles.
So these blue ones, which just look identical sitting down there, if you move them around, can you see as the light bounces off of them that one's slightly different from the other? You can see a rainbow effect.
Okay.
One has that blue iridescence kind of look, a bit greeny. It's like the morpho butterfly,
Yeah, exactly.
the wings.
So that's what we call iridescence, or structural colour. It's a colour produced by the surface features of the flower. And you find that on, can you imagine Queen of the Night tulip? That's got that
Oh,
colour.
that lovely.
Which
It's
looks
quite
black.
black.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But only from some angles.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you catch the light
Yeah.
on it, you'll see blue and green and purple. So it's not such a common thing, but some flowers do this.
Okay.
And we wanted to know if the bees could see it, if they liked it, if it helped them out. And it turns out that they can see it much, much better than we can. So on flowers where I can measure it, but I can't see it, the bees can immediately pick it up.
Oh, wow.
And it speeds up their foraging. It makes it easier for them to see a flower from a distance. So they get there more quickly, get their food more quickly.
Because iridescence in leaves is obviously then for a different purpose, like Begonia pavonina,
Yeah.
the peacock begonia.
Yeah.
That's to reflect light, isn't it?
Well, we don't entirely know what's going on. There are a few iridescent leaves, mostly blue. There's Mapania as well. There are quite a few ferns that do it. Some people think it's about shade tolerance because they're living in very low light environments, so it's reflecting high energy blue away. And some people think it's about camouflage. You just don't look like a plant, so you won't get eaten. We don't really know yet.
Clever plant.
Keep
So-
researching.
so we've
Don't
got
stop.
The third example here. What are we looking at with this comparison?
So this one should be easy for you to see. We've got a little yellow disc and a little yellow disc with 3 black spots on it. And we've been trying to understand the patterning of spots on flowers. So if you think about a lot of daisies that you might grow in a flower bed, Arctotis or Gazania, they often have a ring of black spots.
Okay.
Each ray has a black spot at the base. But then there are some species of daisy, and we work on one called Gorteria, which just makes 2 or 3 black spots. And we wanted to understand what the bee thinks of that, what an insect thinks when it sees these different spot patterns. And it turns out that the 3 spots make you very easy to see. You stand out really well, but you're quite hard to remember. Whereas the ring of spots forms a really clear search image in the bee's head. And then once it's found a flower like that, it'll carry on going to flowers like that for the rest of the foraging
Like
bag.
putting a pin on Google Maps.
Yeah. So they're all just different solutions that different flowers have come up with to the same problem, which is how do I stand out from the crowd and attract the bees?
Isn't that just fascinating? And so thinking about what is best for bees, the plants that are best for bees overall, perhaps that we can grow in our own gardens.
Yeah.
You've got bee borders here, haven't you?
We have.
So you must have loads of examples in those borders. Tell us a little bit about them.
Yeah, so our bee borders are absolutely fantastic, and they're definitely worth coming to see. And you can, if you can't get here to see them, you can download the planting lists off our website as well.
that's
So
useful.
and those are updated
Yeah.
every year as we change the planting, so people can come and learn about what works. They're all herbaceous. I have to say that they are quite horticulturally intensive. These are not a chuck the seed out there and hope for the best kind of
Yeah.
planting. They are,
Yeah.
really well looked after, beautiful borders. But they're themed through plants that provide food for the bees from early in the season till late in the season, and that's really, really important. In this bit of the country, oilseed rape season, there's masses of food for bees, and then before that and after that, there's almost nothing. So you need to make sure that you're providing nectar and pollen from March when the queens hatch right through till October, So it's a good successional planting of rich pollen food, rich nectar food, in colours that are easy for bees to see, which is blues and yellows. They don't see well in the red end of the spectrum. They like blues and yellows. Different lengths of tubes. So if you've got things like a foxglove or a toadflax with a corolla tube, you want to make sure you've got long ones and short ones, so you're not restricting entry only to bees with certain length tongues, because they vary in their tongue length.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a good range of planting out there.
And dandelions, early on in the season, are they good
for pollen?
bees?
Very good for pollen.
Okay.
Yeah. So they like those for pollen. It's late in the season that's hardest, actually. I think ivy goes well. Some of the late flowering daisies are quite good, but that's the hardest actually to keep a good flowering display through till October.
Okay.
But what would be the worst plants for bees then?
So the worst plants for bees is anything without nectar and pollen. That's what they're coming for. They don't really care about the colours and textures. That's just advertising. They want
surely every plant has nectar and pollen, no? Or not?
No.
Right. Okay.
So
that's what people would assume, though, isn't it?
It's what
they
people
think, oh,
would
it's a
assume.
flower. That's good for a bee. But it's not that easy, is it?
Well, there are some flowers that aren't good for bees at all. There are some flowers that have evolved to cheat, so they don't offer a reward at all. They just look like they might.
What would be an example?
There aren't many examples in our traditional garden flowers. There are quite a few orchids that do that, but they tend to be quite rare. Then there are flowers that are only offering one or the other, and they're very good provided you balance them. So borage is a fantastic pollen supply, but not great on nectar.
Okay. And borage on my allotment, the bees are absolutely crazy for it, all over it.
And that's great as long as somebody's got a nectar plant somewhere nearby.
Right.
But if you just had fields and fields of that, it would be a problem.
Good. Okay.
And no, it's fantastic. I have that in all of my bee plantings for celia as well. It goes brilliantly.
Lovely.
And then I'm afraid the other way you can end up without nectar is if for some reason somebody's bred the flower to not have the organs that produce nectar or pollen.
So sterile,
Yeah,
you mean?
yeah. So nectar is pollen's coming from the anthers, the male reproductive structures. Nectar comes from different parts of the flower, but in many flowers it comes from the carpel, the female reproductive structures. So if the flower's been bred sterile, it may not actually have those organs, and so it may not produce the pollen or the nectar at all.
But for the home gardener, it's probably flowering longer, isn't it?
Yes, and it might look more attractive in different ways as well, because you might get more petals as a result.
Okay, yeah, because some of my favourite types of flower are double flowers.
Oh dear.
And I love some of the double hardy geraniums like Summer Skies. But are they bad for bees then?
They're not great, no. So it does depend on the individual line, but in lots of cases, those extra petals are coming at the cost of stamens and carpels. I mean, think about a rose. There's nothing there for a bee to look at it,
That's a real shame, but is there still a place for those in our gardens in a balance with some good bee nectar providing plants as well? I know you're screwing your face up a bit.
Okay, so I'll give you a polite answer, which is that the bigger the overall, the bigger the overall flower display, the more you'll attract pollinators from a distance. So the more show you have in your garden, in a way, the more bees will come in.
Okay.
You just need to make sure there's plenty for them to eat when they get there.
When you say show, so you're talking like colours, like yellows, oranges?
Yeah.
Okay.
So colours, big flowers, things that a passing bee will spot and go, oh, that looks like a good place to go find food. But don't disappoint it. Don't fill it with doubles. Make sure there's food when it gets there.
Okay.
Are you really disappointed about that?
A little bit, yeah.
Because there are lots more double flowers on the market now.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and they are very pretty.
They are very pretty, and I used to work for a mail order plant company, and they always were big sellers as well. So that's very.
And sometimes it's not just the doubles. Sometimes the highly bred lines. There's a snapdragon variety out there that's fully open, so that it doesn't have the snap. And that's not great for bees because all the nectar tends to get stolen by beetles and little flies.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
there's a lot of competition out there, isn't there?
And natural flowers are best, I'm afraid.
Okay. That's a good tip. Sorry, but I'm not going to have any double flowers. I actually don't think I've got any now, but I'm definitely not going to.
Come around to your apartment and just check.
You can. You're welcome. I don't think
they're there. I'm going to rip them out and throw them in the river.
Thank you. I was reading this year about how we look after bees if they are a bit sleepy or tired, and putting sugary water out for them. Is that the right thing to do?
Yeah, I mean it's not something you'd be doing very often, but if I see a queen struggling, and it's usually spring when the queens first hatch and then come out of hibernation, and if there's nothing for them to eat, it's a bit cold, they find it hard to get their body temperature high enough to fly. So if I find one of those, I tend to use one of my kids' Lego bricks. If you turn it over, the little holes look just like the kind of nectar tube on a flower.
Okay.
Put a little bit of sugar solution in there, just sort of 1 in 3 solution of sugar dissolved in warm water, and leave it next to her, and she'll usually have a feed and fly away.
That's great. But you shouldn't just leave it out all of the time, should you?
No, because it mostly you'll just attract ants most of the time.
Okay.
Because you see differing reports on that, don't
Yeah, you do, yeah.
There's always like, oh, put out sugared water for the bees, but no.
Actually, I've got a question I'd like to ask you about wasps. Where's their place in all of this? Because I really don't like them.
No, most people don't. Most people don't. So wasps are interesting, aren't they? They do quite a lot of pollination, so they do have an important role in that. A lot of them, though, are parasites, so they'll lay their eggs in another animal and let the larvae hatch in the other animal, which is a bit grim, which is probably why we started not liking them. But they have an important role in keeping the other balance of insects at the right level.
Okay. But if we didn't have them, would that be really terrible? I'm just asking.
Because actually the reason we don't like them is because they always fall into our beer and dance around on our salads during the summer.
I think they probably have their place.
Okay, that's another polite answer.
What about if we haven't got a garden and we can't create this lovely Technicolor paradise, and we've only perhaps got a window box or a small patio pot, what are the options for people at home?
Well, there are lots of things you can grow that are going to be really attractive, and if you've only got a small space, I'd just focus on the absolute best plants you can. So lavender always goes well. You're going to get flowers from quite early in the season to quite late. You can get some of those lavender varieties that flower for a long time. Bees always love them. Lots of pollen and nectar. They're really good, rewarding flowers. A bit of catnip, maybe. They like that. Extend it a bit with that. If you can, put in a few Phacelia or borage. It depends. I mean, often if you've just got a small space, you don't want something too straggly, do you, and messy looking. Those more annual plants are a bit less tidy. So for the tidy-minded, I'd go lavender. And if you don't mind a bit of mess, then straggle the
I'm taking the mess.
Yeah, definitely. You're always a mess.
I'm ignoring that. So research going forward into the future, what will you be doing, in the years to come?
Well, we've got a lot more things to find out about how flowers work. I want to understand how they make some of these structures. This iridescent effect, we call it the blue halo because it's strongest in the blue. Nobody knows how any living organism can make that, or how your morpho butterfly is made either. I'd love to know how those structures are built.
Yeah.
But there are lots of other things about flowers that we're interested in understanding. We're interested in nectar spurs, so the length of the tube the nectar sits in on a columbine or a toadflax. How's that controlled? How does that matter? The tongue length of the bee must be quite important there. And then there's a lot of work feeding this out as well into different sorts of crops and trying to improve pollination of strawberries, of broad beans, all of those things that the bees love, but are not necessarily at the moment the best flowers they could be.
Oh, that's so fascinating. And obviously here in the garden there's the bee border, which is open all year round, and there's always something to see there as well.
Absolutely. I mean, the whole garden is really focused on showcasing scientific research in the plantings we have. So the plantings look gorgeous, but you come along and you learn about them. So the bee borders tell you about the best plants for bees. But there are other parts of the garden. You can come and look at our systematic beds, which show different plant families. That's wonderful all year round to see what's in flower at different times of year. We have a new rising path structure that looks down on that now. We have an area of the garden called our Understanding Plants area, which also shows people things about how plants work. We've got a display at the moment on how plants tell the time. Which is a really fun one to go and look at.
That's great for another podcast, I
Wow,
think.
yeah. That's a whole new area, isn't it? It's all really, really interesting. Thank you so much. What's the website so our listeners can have a look at those plants? Is it Cambridge University Botanic Garden, I think?
Yes, www.botanic.cam.ac.uk.
I almost caught you out then, didn't I?
There was a lot of frantic rushing for leaflets.
And are you on social media as well?
We are. We're on Twitter and Facebook.
Okay,
and Instagram
brilliant.
as well. So Twitter is at CU Botanic Garden, Facebook Cambridge University Botanic Garden, and Instagram is CU Botanic Garden.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's been really interesting, and I'm very interested to hear about your research in the future as well.
Great.
Yeah, it was a real buzz. So let's have a gossip. What's been going on?
We haven't seen each other.
Let's open the MacBook and see who's up to what.
We haven't seen each other for a while, have we?
I know.
It's very exciting when we get together and we get all a bit childish, don't we?
There's also so much gossip and stuff,
I
So
know.
many things that go on, so much stuff on social media, little spats that we've seen that in the last few weeks people have been sowing their seeds far too early. And there's been uproar. There's been uproar
about seed sowing too early. Come on, you know? It's very early in the year.
But do people not like... I appreciate people, you know, getting angry about people sowing stuff too soon, but do people really not read the instructions? And in my opinion, I might be a bit of a hard-nosed bee here, but kind of, if someone hasn't read the instructions, they sow them too early, they die. That's kind of on their chin. You have to learn from mistakes.
But I think it's social media is influencing, isn't it? And so if somebody is sowing some seeds really early, and then somebody who's perhaps new to gardening sees, oh, they're sowing their seeds now, I better sow my seeds now. And then somebody who has perhaps a little bit more experience then says, well, actually, you know, if you just wait a little while, you might find that those seedlings will be stronger, they'll grow better, you'll have better plants in the end. So that's sharing knowledge, isn't it? But there's a way of putting it.
Yeah. I guess at the end of the day, people are just getting excited.
We've had very mild weather.
Some people think it's competitive, though, don't they?
Yeah, and that's not what gardening's about. So I'm not keen on that. I stay out of that mostly. But yeah, sowing seeds too early it's not for me. I've learned great patience in gardening. January for me is too early to sow many of the seeds that I've seen be sown. But who knows? They may grow into wonderful, beautiful plants in time.
And there's always, I mean, we've been seeing this way back since, you know, the beginning of the year, but early flowers in the garden. And it makes it feel like when you see those flowers there that, oh my God, climate change is changing everything. But, you know, before social media, we didn't see those early flowers. There's probably always been daffodils coming out in November, but now it's big drama. Isn't it?
And you know, and it isn't just climate change. It just depends on so many different factors. Your garden, the bulbs that you've got. Sometimes people will post, you know, this daffodil's out now. Maybe that's an earlier variety.
Exactly. There are some out there, you know. Yeah. So what else? You've got an allotment now, haven't you?
Oh, let me talk about.
You're so excited, aren't you?
We moved house last April, so I had to give up my allotment I had, which I'd had for 8 years. And it was the saddest thing about moving house, was giving up the allotment, never mind the house. 6 months later, I've finally got my allotment in the city. So it's very different. So before I had a very rural allotment with fields all around. This time I've got a smaller allotment, but it's kind of housing around, and it's on a massive site in Norwich.
Is it, you can walk there? Or?
I could bike there. Yeah, I can have a little cycle through the city, which is super nice in the summer.
How idyllic.
It sounds idyllic, doesn't it?
With this pannier of aubergines or whatever.
That's not how it works. I'm really sorry to disappoint everybody, but allotment keeping is not idyllic. I do drive in the winter time, but I plan on cycling.
Have you been digging it yourself? I see that you've been roping in all these people on social media to dig for you.
You know, this is one thing that social media is great for. Come and help me do some weeding. The allotment's covered in grass and weeds, perennial weeds. So the absolutely wonderful Kirsty from My Little Allotment.
Oh, she's ace. I love her.
She's fabulous.
I love her accent more than anything.
Her accent's ace,
it's like
isn't it?
Lincoln-y.
It's like northern, but not too northern.
I can listen to her all day, even if she's just reading random books to me.
She is super lovely.
Amazing.
Well, there you go, Kirsty. There's an invite. Read random books to Michael. She's been in Norfolk. She's come onto my radio show.
Yes.
She's also done a talk at a wellbeing evening about how her allotment has helped her PTSD and her mental health wellbeing. And so then obviously I dragged her down the allotment to do some digging. And while we were down there, Joe from Grow with Joe, he also came
Joe
along.
with Grow.
Joe with Grow. Grow with Joe. Did I say Joe with Grow?
No, I said Grow with
Joe
I love
with
it.
Grow.
It's a spoonerism, isn't it? Yeah. I used to love those at school.
Anyway, Joe from Grow with Joe, he came over as well, and between the three of us, mostly those two actually.
Between the two of them.
Yeah, cleared a load of weeds.
Innocent coffee run. Oh, I'll get you some coffee.
No, I just stood around taking photographs and chatting. But as it so happened, obviously we've met Joe via social media on Instagram mainly. Have never met him before, so we're chatting away. It was really nice to actually meet somebody from social media, and he went to school with my husband.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
You and your little what do you call it? Inbuilt life?
Were you going to say inbred?
Inbred, that's it.
Sorry.
I'm now going to ban Michael from coming back to Norfolk.
Darling, you can get me back. I'm only from Suffolk.
This is super true. So it kind of shows what a small world it really is.
Yeah, it really is. I've been in a garden centre this week as well.
In a garden centre?
Yeah, I was eyeing up the conifers. Conifers
Interesting.
are surprisingly sexy. The colours are just so vibrant and they hardly need any filter on Instagram.
That's what it's all about. Plants that don't need filtering on social media. I've never been a big conifer fan until I went to Bressingham Gardens. There's a garden there called Foggy Bottom Garden, and it's landscaped including many different conifers and firs. Wow. I've been, but many years ago. I think I went in the autumn when the grasses were looking very nice, the seed heads. Yeah.
Really lovely.
The
effect.
colours,
And
the textures.
The world of island borders as well, isn't it?
Yes, that's it. Yeah, that's there as well.
Island.
Very nice. So conifers, is that going to be a big trend, do you think?
Yeah, we can make it a trend.
Let's make it a trend.
Yeah, I saw another trend as well this week. Xeric landscaping, which is like drought-tolerant plants.
Yeah.
It's a trend that's big in America. You see it on a lot of the different mail order websites. But
something we need to be thinking about here.
Such a cool, trendy word, isn't it?
It sounds very cool.
Yeah,
so
look
thinking
out for that
about plants that we would use in hot weather,
one.
dry
you
weather.
Use hot weather, plants you can forget to water, plants that you can basically treat very badly.
So not only are you useful for this potential climate change, well, I'm saying potential, but you know, climate change, and also if you want to be a slightly lazy gardener.
Let's have I just having a look at who's been noisy on Twitter in these last few days.
Yeah. Who has been noisy?
Yeah, who has been noisy? Do you know those guys that grow the succulents, Fabulous Fat Friends?
Yeah.
They're always having a bit of a gossip, aren't they?
Yes,
And
they told me off.
They really know their stuff, though.
They told me off the other day.
Yeah?
Didn't you, Fabulous Fat Friends?
What for?
But was it Fabulous Friends or Fabulous Fat? I can't remember. Anyway, they are fabulously fat succulents.
Oh, hurry up.
Sorry. I posted a photograph on my stories of a succulent bowl that was on my friend's parents' dining room table, and it looked super cool. But they contacted me and said, "Is this inside?" And I said, "Yes, it's inside." And they said, "Well, it will die."
Sempervivums?
Yes.
Yeah. Why
it
do
will
people do
die.
that?
And I said, "Well, it's not mine." And they said, "But you know, you need to tell them it will die. They need to go outside. They're going to get leggy. They're going to, they're going to die." And I just said, I'm so sorry, but they've gone away now. I can't tell them anything.
Why didn't you just lie and say, yeah, I did? I would have done. Yeah, I told him to put it outside.
Basically, Michael Perry has just told you all that he lies to you on social media.
Okay, you can make life easier for yourself. What do you think? They wanted proof that it's outside or what?
I don't know. Anyway, they are awesomely knowledgeable.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
Very helpful.
And it's great to have these ambassadors that are urging us to grow plants in the right way and also to help amateurs get it right as well.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Anything else? Anything else?
No,
we over the gossip for this week?
I think I'm dry of gossip now.
Really? Should we get a...
My gossip shore
coffee?
has pulled out. The waves have gone in. I don't know. It's over anyway. It's cracking and dry. Like my lips. Good night.
The Plant Based Podcast is sponsored by Suttons, suppliers of gardeners' favourite products since 1806. Unsurprisingly, Suttons now have everything you need for your outside space. Award-winning flower and vegetable plants, garden furniture and equipment, plus gifts for gardeners. Visit them online at suttons.co.uk.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Plant Based Podcast.
Have a browse of the rest of the library or hop on over to the website, which is theplantbasedpodcast.net.
You'll also find our social media links. Please connect with us and let us know about any plant-based projects that you think we should be covering on the show.
And make sure you subscribe to our podcast so you'll be the first to hear the next episode. We're releasing once a fortnight. So until next time, enjoy the world of plants.